Hey everyone, I'm Josh Martin. This is Making America. Let's keep talking. We're a couple weeks out from the January 6th attack on Capitol Hill. And you can't help but think, where are all of these, police officers and security? We talk about national security. DOD requested $750 billion. How can you justify, those types of numbers when an angry mob is able to overrun? I think these are your words, Juliette, and I'll introduce you. It's one of the co-equal branches of government.
Yeah.
It's like them running into the Supreme Court or the White House. So I wanted to get into this conversation about national security, exploring what it means, what are the details, or listen to some of your conversations before, they're trying to de-escalate after they were overrun.
Yeah.
And I think you used the words they were unprepared, or there were lapses in communication between the different agencies. And it seemed that it was almost, there's obviously some intent there when you have President Trump or former President Trump, happy belated inauguration day,
Yeah.
incited, this kind of unruly mob to march across the Capitol. And you kind of see a bunch of people coming over. And even with all of that, it didn't seem like they were prepared.
Yep.
But really excited. We have Juliette Kayyem. She's a former DHS official during the Obama administration, and she's a current senior Belfer lecturer at the Harvard School of Government. So tremendous background in security. Been all over the place, news, CNN. She writes for The Atlantic, has a regular column there. So really excited to have you and your expertise. How are you doing? How's your day going?
Oh, it feels weird. I mean, we're talking, although this will probably post later, the day after inauguration, and I had sort of promised myself just a day to breathe, because for someone like me, not only have the last 4 years been crazy, but because I tend to, I get asked to do a lot of public stuff. Most of my career is pretty private, and I'm, teaching or consulting or whatever. And so really it did start December 25th. I remember Nashville, major explosion by some, crazy guy. We don't really know what the sentiment was. So I feel like a horrible sound has been in my ears for 4 years, and it's going to take a while to get those, to get the white noise back. But on the other hand, I just have tremendous confidence in this new president. I feel like whatever, this isn't a plug for him. He's already president. So it's just whatever you thought in the primaries, whatever your political affiliation, I think he's going to give us the ability to look away a little bit. And I think that's going to be very healthy for the divisions that we see. I think one of the reasons why things are so disunified, I'm already answering half the questions, but it's just we're all being forced to engage. And in some ways, maybe we weren't meant, maybe like you go play football and, I do my consulting and teaching, you know what I mean? Like maybe not every minute.
You have to see everything that's going on at all times, because there's real impacts on lives, as we've seen over the last 4 years. So I think it will be a good thing. Maybe we can have a brief exhale. But I think with the momentum that we've built over the past year and the attention that the previous administration has garnered for all the wrong reasons, I think we can use that energy in a more sustainable way. Less, fight or flight, and more, hey, we have some goals here. Let's make sure we're reaching those goals.
And I think, just since we're talking the day after, I think no one should view the call to unity as Biden is moving on or is a softie. If you actually, and I urge people to also read it, because his delivery is not Obama-esque, so you can lose some of the gems sometimes. But I read it. When I heard it, I thought it was great. When I read it, I thought it was so much more powerful for me, because in it he talks about unity, but I want to call it sort of unity with a fist. That he's saying, if you're a white supremacist, and he uses these words, white supremacist, domestic terrorist, if you lie, you don't really get the benefit of unity. And I think people, especially from different communities, shouldn't view, bit different backgrounds, immigrants, African Americans, shouldn't view his call for unity as, oh, we're just moving on again as if everything were fine. No, I think it's actually was a sort of line in the sand, that we now know what it means. Not that we didn't before, but we see the consequences of what it means to nurture that underbelly of ugliness that has existed in America forever.
Yeah.
And we are better as a nation. We're not going to cure it in everyone, but we're better as a nation if it's not nurtured.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think it's more of a unity in the sense of, hey, there's some people who are working against our unity and what we stand for as a country, and kind of reestablishing and revisiting those ideals, working towards them. We think of equality and access and representation and all of those good things. I do want to get into your background, though, because I think it's pretty impressive. Obviously, former DHS official, professor at Harvard, mom, consultant. Can you give us a brief overview of kind of your background and history?
And I think you're similar to me, Josh. I like to say I've had one career but many jobs. And as my husband likes to say, thank God you have ADD of jobs and not of spouses. I've always liked doing new things. It's just the way I am. It takes as we were talking before the show, it's a challenging too, as you're constantly reinventing things. You constantly have to feed the beast, but I like having different projects. I've always, so at parts of my career, I've worked in state government. I was a state Homeland Security advisor and worked at DHS, and earlier than that, DOJ. So I've had three sort of big government stints.
Yeah, you worked in the Supreme Court. You were the advisor for the governor of Massachusetts.
Yes. Yeah. So I have I'm a lawyer by training. I've been teaching for a while, and I love, I teach in crisis management and Homeland Security, and that's sort of the base. I do a lot of consulting and run a company around safety and security risk mitigation, and think about helping companies and individuals in those companies think about communication, situational awareness, all the buzzwords that we use, just to get us into a world that's safer. We're never going to get to safe in this world, but we can get to safer. And then I've been really blessed to have a very good communications outlets, that I've had a contract with CNN. So you see, I'm always the one that comes on when things are bad. I'm always waiting to be called for good news. But CNN, I write for The Atlantic. I have a weekly segment on our local NPR, and then do a lot of Twitter, which I like. And so it lets me sort of be engaged in a public conversation and learn. I mean, that's the other thing. So it's been just a combination of things. But if I were to say what's the career, it's really in risk mitigation and for a safer homeland. And whether it's in government or private sector or academia, it's just sort of, those are all consistent. And yes, I have 3 kids who are all home.
How old, if you don't mind asking?
Well, no, I'm older. Older. They're older too, so I'm lucky. I guess I said there's no good age to be for COVID, but obviously it would be much harder if they were younger. So I have one who left college for the year.
Okay.
And so she's back, and then I have 2 boys. One's a senior who just got into college, and one who's a freshman. The 2 boys have been remote since last March, although we're, knock on wood, they're at the local public high school. They'll get in. And the house is crowded now, but by August or September, knock on wood, mine will be going. Yeah, two of the 3 of them will be gone. Yeah.
Well, they're old enough to entertain themselves.
Yeah, it's a lot of screen time. So my husband is very chill about it, and he doesn't worry about it. I get worked up about it occasionally, but it's all good.
Yeah, no, that screen time is real. You don't think about it until you find that your phone is in your hand and you've been scrolling on Twitter or Instagram for the last 15 minutes, and you're just like, where did those 15 minutes go?
Yeah.
But yeah, so tremendous background. I really want to maybe establish, what is national security to you? What does it mean to you?
So it's a great question, and it means a lot of different things. And how I think about it is in terms of homeland security, which isn't different, but it's just basically for the U.S. It's investing in, and I'm going to use specific words like we're in a class. It's investing in the secure flow of people, goods, ideas, and networks. So why do I say it that way? Why do I teach it that way? So secure flow is important because the previous administration, and ones even before that, would have you believe that we could get to 100% security. You can't. Do you know before COVID, um, uh, how many people would have been in the air at any given time on domestic flights was about 1 million, right? So we just have we had a very moving society, which is good. That's why what we loved about it. So we hate about this. So we think about it in terms of securing the movement, and then you think about people, ideas, and networks and goods in terms of commerce, and then that is how I think about homeland security. So it's not about who's the threat: Iran, Russia, some guys who get into a cyber network, a virus in China. It is all of those things. And how do you just maintain who you are as a society while protecting yourself, which this past administration didn't do.
Okay, so we've established national security is the flow of these things: people, goods, services, thoughts, ideas.
Exactly. Secure flow.
Secure flow. Yeah. Secure flow. Yes. Security. Yes. So when we think of, cyber crimes and different foreign entities that might try to influence ideas or interrupt the flow of ideas, how do we define those threats?
Yeah. So it's so I think the four greatest threats to the United States now are not about a specific country, although obviously we have threats from Russia and Iran. So for us here in the US, for our communities, the four that I worry about the most, and I want to just be clear here, I put guns aside because guns unfortunately are the tools. So right. I obviously
it's just a symptom, or
right? I obviously view. I mean, obviously, you could solve a lot of problems if you could control the access to a certain weaponry. But if I thought about sort of what are the threats, viruses, so obviously cyber attacks or cyber vulnerabilities, especially our critical infrastructure, terrorism and the rise of white radical terrorism, and climate change. So those four are sort of, I think, what are in varying degrees the greatest threats to the United States right now. And notice what they have in common: they're borderless. So it's not like you can say, oh, this country, or oh, this, we got to protect this place. They're, as we see with the vaccine, with the virus, you can't isolate it.
Yep.
So that's sort of where how to think about the threats we have. And so one is very, very, I just saw a car leave. I guess one of my kids is leaving. Sorry about that.
No worries.
One is very existential. I think that's climate change. The other is very pressing, which is white supremacy and right-wing radicalism.
Yeah. So just to recap, we have the virus, we have cyber, we have kind of these extremist white radicals, and then we have, what was the fourth one? I'm sorry.
Climate change, viruses, cyber, and
the radicals,
terrorism.
Okay,
right.
Perfect. Right. Okay, so those are the threats. They're borderless, that I would imagine there's not something you can easily contain. So when you're thinking of these borderless threats, my first thought is, let's look at the example of white radicalism.
Yeah.
How did this grow? It's not something new in our country. No. It hasn't been. It's existed for since we've been around.
Such a good question. When we delude ourselves to think, and I had a tendency to say this I'm Arab American, but as a white woman, you say, oh God, if we could only get to the 20th, as if like we weren't racist before and we won't be racist still. But I think three factors combined to make the last 4 years particularly noxious. And also just to remember, particularly violent, according to the FBI, that the FBI at least will tell you that the white supremacy terrorism is more dangerous than Islamic terrorism at this stage. So there's three things that I, as someone who examines this, looks at it. So the first is just the rise of the social media network. So you just have platforms. So I don't use the term lone wolf anymore. It is not there's no lone wolves. They all feel like they're together. They all feel like there's a community. They feed off each other. They energize each other.
The internet makes that very easy
yes,
to do.
And that's why I'm into deplatforming. I think it's a good idea. Deplatforming being what Twitter did to the former president. The second is demographic. So, and in 2016, the same time as Donald Trump is becoming president on an election, based on exclusion, right? On a campaign based on exclusion, whether it's immigrants. Never bet against hate, right? And he, the same year, the U.S. Census documented that non-white U.S. babies, so this doesn't even include immigration, outnumbered white U.S. babies. So so we are now in the process. We are maybe a generation and a half away from the U.S. being a majority non-white U.S. citizen. Okay, so this is for me. This is okay. Yeah, that's exactly. My parents are immigrants. My husband's
It makes
Jewish.
perfect sense. They've been talking about the trends for a while.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but obviously for people who not only feel threatened by diversity, but also sort of hate it, this moment becomes this like galvanizing moment. They actually have a name for it. It's called the displacement theory. The displacement effort, which is their feeling of the U.S. is the pie is limited. So the existence of you or you succeeding means I can't, right? So instead of thinking of it, the pie is expandable. And so therefore more of you, an African-American male, say, means fewer of me, right? So that's just the way they view it. So that's hideous and disgusting, but it is what animates them. And then the third thing is, and I'm as you have read about my stuff, I'm pretty direct about this. Donald Trump has nurtured white supremacy racism for more than 4 years. He started with the Central Park rape, So he has nurtured it. And that nurturing has meant that no one was shaming it. So that these guys came out, think about it. They weren't wearing hoods. Not that that's a good thing.
They
were like, hey.
They see this guy, like,
and
hey,
they thought
maybe it's okay. I think this
exactly. And they thought he was going to protect them. So I remember thinking we're in a different world in Charlottesville. One, because they didn't have hoods on. Like I thought these guys think they think they're part of the A team. And that's what Trump made them feel. And so, there's a cliche that Trump plays both sides, right? Like when Trump said both sides. And I think that's one of the most miscalculated lies, most calculated lies on his part. Because the truth is, he doesn't believe in both sides. He believes in one side. It's one side that he cares a lot about. So it's just, so we've been living with a racist president who's been nurturing white supremacy. Just say it. Just say it. Like, it's not hard to say. And that doesn't include all of his voters, but boy, does his party need to deal with the problems that they have.
Yeah. All of his voters explicitly racist? I would say pretty confidently no, but when you're sympathetic to racist ideas and thoughts and your vote in some way, shape, or forms helps support and perpetuate these ideas and normalize them, it's dangerous to a large eventual majority of the country.
Yeah.
And so this displacement theory came up in a previous conversation earlier this week. I had a chance to speak to someone who worked in the Trump administration, Elizabeth Newman, and she was explaining the displacement theory. I appreciate you explaining it as well. But I kind of believe, and I mentioned this in the previous conversation, I'm curious your thoughts on this, that it's really about a power struggle. Yeah. And I think when you look at this previous election, and you see all of the disenfranchised voters from the past being re-enfranchised in Arizona and Georgia, you get the election results that we've seen. Obviously, Trump has lost the popular vote twice now, but by an even larger margin this go around this cycle. You got to help but think, that's a part of the less resources, but also it's about control.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is. It's about and who they blame for their sense of lack of control. That they don't blame. I mean, just the industries
The,
change, or they don't blame the
yeah,
failure of not having a minimum wage, or they don't blame a party that wants to
they don't
refuse
blame
some
the
health care.
institutions; they blame
Yeah,
the people.
yeah,
Yeah,
right. The
yeah.
people with generally with the least amount of power. I mean, what are they upset about? They're look, of the group that's violent.
Hmm.
And what's really interesting is some of the data coming out of that, of who's been arrested. These aren't poor people. This isn't the angry. This isn't les miserables, like the angry masses. This is CEOs and tech executives. I mean, there is such
Government officials.
yeah, there's such an undercurrent. Good point.
Yeah.
Such an undercurrent of hate, right? There's no economic explanation for that.
Hmm. No, yeah, and
I'm glad you
that
said
kind of leads me to my next question. So we're using the example of radicalism,
yeah,
white supremacists, kind of extremist terrorist groups that are shown to be more violent and more of a threat to the
yeah,
United States, given the data out by numerous agencies and ACLU, FBI. The data is there, and it's pretty consistent. What are the tools?
yeah,
You talked about deplatforming.
yeah,
What else can we do when you look at your national security kind of toolbox? How do we enforce the free, secure flow of goods, people, services, et
yeah.
cetera? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons why I've been very insistent, and honestly have gotten, criticism and threats, and it's not been a fun 3 weeks for me. But when I
I'm
came out
sure.
with the piece in the Atlantic, essentially saying, let's look at him as a terrorist rather than an inciter or a president who, my favorite euphemism, dog whistles. These aren't dog whistles. These are like
They're pretty
literally like,
explicit.
they're
Everyone's
like
watching this
somebody,
happen.
exactly. I don't
Yeah.
know, like dog whistles are. So because the reason why also I wanted to do it is I wanted them to think about I wanted people to think about, okay, this is a problem. We've had a problem like this, or the world has had problems like this. Let's think about it through the counterterrorism lens, right? Because that lens has a whole bunch of tools. So and I'm going to end with the most important one, but it's deplatforming. So you get the hate offline. We did this with ISIS. It's criminal prosecutions, not. So I love all these arrests that are going on after January 6th, because it's not just those people are getting into trouble. It's a message to other people, like, we're not messing around.
It's unacceptable.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It's security. It's security theater is a wrong word, but it's a high presence of security so that they can't do something like this again. It's intelligence and better intelligence sharing, which we didn't see happening. It's some of it is trying to separate those who might be recruits from those who are already violent. So some of it has like a diplomatic effort. And I think, those of us, the people in my party or people on this side who, sort of shun all Trump voters in one fell swoop, really have to understand we need to figure out a way in which people can understand we're actually not doing that.
Yeah.
That there's, but the most important is, and I'll use harsh language with you, but I'm more careful when I'm on CNN, is we need to crush Donald J. Trump. I mean, crush him, because
Yeah.
the leader of a terrorist organization cannot be viewed as having a second act. He cannot have any oxygen. So the deplatforming, the isolation, the cabinet members leaving, everything that was going on, the losing of the banks, the fundraisers who won't give him money anymore, all of those are essential.
Yeah. I mean, it's essentially, while he's down and out, make sure it stays that way.
Make
Kick
sure,
him while he's down. It's figure speech.
That's why it's important that all these Republicans who are talking about unity have to understand unity has a price tag, right? I mean, in other words, it's not unity for unity's sake. It is something bigger and deeper. We have to remember that.
Yeah, unity in the sense that we're all on the same team. And that's kind of the premise of Making America.
Right.
And this actually came up in the conversation earlier this week. This is why I like having these on a weekly basis and talking to some really cool, smart people. The idea is that there's 50 million people that believe the election was rigged, or that the results. So you can't fight your way out of that. You have to use some, I think the word that Elizabeth used was empathy. You have to be able to understand and kind of work with what's going on, why they believe what they believe, and then just kind of, slowly but surely working,
Yeah.
to maybe more
And I
moderate
and
position.
coming from her is really important because she's a Republican. She and I are
Yeah,
friends, and
that's what I was.
we talk on, we're on different sides of the aisle on most social
Mhm,
issues and stuff. But I think her plea is you you know um, is that to get that unity means you isolate the ugliness
mhm.
and the violence, and the Republicans should be invested in that, because otherwise their party is that it would just I'll come back to that in a second. And then the other is we have to find a way to bring people back to the table, to
Mhm.
understand that there's a system, that democracy requires a set of rules of engagement that you cannot shun. You can't just all of a sudden say a touchdown is 9 points, right? As it just
Yeah,
doesn't work
yeah.
that way. But the one thing I did want to say is, because as I said at the beginning, I'm Arab American and have experienced that same issue or a similar issue when after 9/11 and after the ISIS attacks and after
Mhm.
that people do a broad stroke of Arabs and Muslims, as people
Yeah.
might do a broad stroke of Republicans, right? So,
Mhm.
and um, the Arab and Muslim community in the United States spent a lot of time um, disassociating themselves with that element. In other words,
Mhm.
they found it they knew that it was up to them to say, this group doesn't speak for us. This group is
Mhm.
not us.
Yeah.
And they don't represent Islam or Arab or whatever. And the Republicans need to do that. Instead, the
Yeah.
Republicans are acting all sensitive, like, X, Y, and
We don't
oh,
want to disenfranchise all the people that
yeah,
have
and you're like,
supported us over the years.
exactly, yeah,
We need
exactly.
their support to be successful and to
Exactly.
maintain
But
control and influence.
but now they have to recognize the support comes at a price, because
Yep.
it's, well, one,
It's not
well,
lasting.
it's not lasting because they'll turn on you. But two, you lost. If
Yeah.
you thought that strategy was going to work for you, right? We've
Hmm.
got 4 years essentially to get our act together as Democrats, but
Hmm.
the strategy did not work. I mean, this is
Yep.
the proof is in the pudding. So, you know, anyway, that's why I can't say enough how consequential South Carolina was and getting Biden ahead, how consequential Georgia was. My God,
Yeah.
all of those are so consequential.
Yeah. So we talked about some of the tools. Let's review those. Deplatforming
Yeah.
was one. Help me out here.
So deplatforming, criminal prosecutions,
Criminal prosecution.
isolation, sort of social isolation in terms of that, like, for example, the Trump kids do not get
Hmm.
a fancy life after this.
Yep.
The cabinet left beforehand. The shaming, which
Hmm.
has to go on. And I think that these guys should be shamed. And, proof that it does work. Look at Ted Cruz trying to do somersaults to claim that that's not what he really meant. I mean, in other words, he's been so isolated by in the Senate,
Hmm.
he has no path right now. I
Yep.
mean, and then what's called, and I'm going to be very careful with the language,
Hmm.
uh, leadership decapitation. It
Hmm.
is only symbolic; it's not real, but
Hmm.
it says something about um, you know, just that total isolation of the leadership.
Yep. Where they can't influence and lead. I mean, it
Yeah.
makes sense. When there's no organization, it's difficult to organize.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll put it in layman's terms.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
yeah, try to keep it simple. But yeah, so we talked about, hey, what are the threats? What are what is national security? What are
Yeah.
the threats? What are the tools? Where does that leave us today?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, well, my first thoughts, and I wrote this in the notes.
Yeah. Tell me.
Yeah,
I
so
mean, how
just
are you feeling today? Because I mean, I'm a, middle-aged white woman. Like, I mean, how, like, where are the scars? I'm so curious.
yeah, I think well, one, immediately before this, I was driving around New York, so probably not the best time to answer a question of how you're feeling when
Yeah.
you're in New York traffic.
Yeah.
But that aside, I think I'm definitely in a hopeful place. I'm glad that we seem to be putting this kind of chapter where it belongs behind us and moving forward from it. That doesn't mean that we disregard it or put it aside and can't acknowledge and understand that there are challenges that we that existed before, like we mentioned before. Racism existed before. Poverty existed before. Housing crisis existed before. Gaps in medical care existed before. So I think we realized that these challenges, we kind of had a big fire. I feel like we had to put out to then be able to continue to work on the challenges that we've been facing, for seemingly my entire life, and they're not going away easily. But I think in terms of scars, I don't necessarily feel scarred by the presidency. I mean, I think you have Barack Obama, black president for 8 years. White lash is real. It's proven. It's not the first time it's happened. So it's not, for a lot of people, it wasn't a surprise. I can't say I was surprised by a lot of the things that went down. Even entering this previous election, I had a feeling, and I've voiced it amongst my private community, that the election wasn't going to be the issue. It was going to be the results. And, as we approach the transition of power and the inauguration, what's going to happen when, he's been denying these results before the election, before the votes were even cast. What does that mean? But so I'm curious. Some of the first executive orders, directives that President Biden has issued, we're back in the Paris Climate Agreement. Where does everything that happened over the past 4 years leave us in terms of national security when you consider the global community, our allies, our standing, our democracy was clearly exposed. It was very vulnerable in the past couple months.
It's not going to change in a heartbeat. And there were some things that, and obviously other things like being tough on Russia will begin, I think.
When did we become so friendly with Russia?
I know,
why does this president being so cozy with Russia? Since when have we ever been cool with Russia?
Of their relationship. So I'm a Chicks fan, the former Dixie Chicks, and they had a new album out. It's basically about Trump. It's about marriage. There's a whole bunch of stuff is going on in the album, but they have this line. It's about the resistance and sort of all of them becoming politicized. And then there's a line in the middle of it where she just looks in the camera with the three of them with their sassy faces and says, "What the hell happened in Helsinki?" Like, why did the president just, buy into everything Putin said? I mean, that's a sort of untold story. Is it money? Is it pictures? Is it whatever? But we don't know at this stage. But so a couple things first of all, and I had the luxury of traveling the world before COVID. That's a huge part of my life. I miss it terribly. I love traveling. I know. I miss it. I don't know if I miss the travel or the room service, but something I miss. But, and it's confining here with kids and stuff. But the world wants us back. I mean, parts of the world want us back. So that's good. So I think that there'll be goodwill, although I think there'll always be this concern. Wait, this is the country that elected Donald Trump and almost reelected him. I think the world did not stay still for us, however. Yeah. So these re-engagements in WHO and other efforts, the world moved to China. Yeah, exactly. The Europeans created their own structures and stuff, but China was the beneficiary. And then I think for us here, I think COVID and the focus on COVID is absolutely necessary for Biden, absolutely necessary, and essential. But because things won't start until after that. In terms of the hate, I think a couple things are happening. I mean, I think one is, my theory is proving true, right? We deplatformed Donald Trump. 80% of disinformation has fallen off of Twitter. Can you believe that? 80%. Why? Because it's all those damn bots that are feeding off of him. So he's got however many votes. So I do think that isolation will help in terms of radicalization and recruitment. Number two, I think that we continue to prosecute. We look to focusing our counterterrorism efforts on that. We continue to isolate, and even people have to suffer consequences for it. I mean, in other words, if you got a Nazi tattoo on your neck, that's justifiably you lose your job. You can't if you're the other.
I wouldn't employ you.
I know, and but the third is I think then this harder part, which is that sort of de-escalation, that sort of
Mhm.
unity part that President Biden was talking about. How do we get there? I think is harder. I mean, some people, say that the tools of cultism really have to be used. That you have to isolate people from their information. Create the information strains that they have. That is actually what violent MAGAism is actually not different than Jim Jones, right? And so,
Mhm.
I'm not an expert in that, but I do know that we need to do that.
Yeah, I think I mean, there's clearly a lot to do. It's
Yeah.
definitely a moving target as we, gain access to new information and things develop. Uh, I do want to kind of lead to this next
Yeah.
part, though. You're a professional consultant. So if you were to give your professional consulting opinion in the most pressing steps that the U.S. should take to secure or to bolster its national security in this immediate moment, what would they be?
To bolster our national security. So a
Mhm.
couple things. I mean, number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It's not hard. Is you got to get a handle of COVID.
Mhm.
And that's not just because we have lots of people dying, and we can't, and or two, that we can't get our economy moving. The
Mhm.
world perceives us as broken right now. I mean, so if you
Yep.
think that national security is not just real strength, but the projection of strength,
Yeah,
right?
it's a reputation. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
It's reputational. Uh, then we got to fix the brands. You know about
Mhm.
brands. We have to fix the brand, and the brand is in
Yep.
pretty bad shape right now. So that's something to think about, and something to really focus on. So Biden's focus on COVID is an economic uh, is a health, economic, and security initiative. Those three
Mhm.
things simultaneously. Once we get to that, I actually think everything else is fixable. I mean, we've got to isolate Russia. We've got to engage China in a way that's meaningful, that protects our interests. We have to deal with
Mhm.
immigration and the immigration challenges that this administration will still have. All of those seem fixable to me, once you get COVID under control.
Okay. COVID, one, two, three,
Four
four,
and
and five,
five. One,
and even getting back to your original definition of national security, securing the flow of goods,
yeah,
services, et cetera. COVID has stopped the flow of a lot of things.
yeah,
You look at our
yeah,
economy and the goods and services and people, travel. That's everything. I do kind of have a bonus question, and
yeah.
this is more of a it's off script.
Oh,
Uh,
that's okay. I'm used to it.
but it's in line with the national security. So my first thought, and this kind of I would imagine this falls under national security when you think of securing our democracy
Yeah,
and the threats to our democracy and the ability of people to vote and participate. How do we secure that? How does the
yeah,
national security kind of world look at securing our
yeah,
democracy in terms
yeah,
of like our ideas
yeah.
and the ideals of the
And how
country?
they're represented. So there's two
Yep.
threats to that. That's such a great question, and it's good to end on that. I mean, the one is, of course, an external one. That
Mhm.
Russia and others would use information or attacks on critical infrastructure, to undermine our democracy,
Mhm.
and we need to protect our election systems and our information systems from that. And we have a commitment to that here with the new president. But the other is, of course, voter suppression, the count. I mean,
Yep.
the line is normal. It doesn't matter who votes; it matters who counts. And I
Mhm.
think uh, the the shock of recognizing that there's huge elements within the Republican Party that fundamentally do not believe in certain people being represented. You hear
Mhm.
these stories, where like Republican officials are saying, well, it's not all the votes, it's just the Atlanta ones. Well, you know exactly what that means, right? It means,
Yeah, yeah. There's no secret,
yeah,
no
exactly.
surprise.
So we need to get laws in place, and I know that the new administration is committed to that, that are about making access easier, making counting easier, making it less subject to the whims of X, Y, and Z. I mean, look, we came unbelievably close to not winning this. I mean,
Mhm.
a few court cases that were different, a few, you know,
So I chalk that up to the
yeah,
electoral college.
yeah, I think that's right.
So where does that come into play in national security? If you look at, or we're evaluating our democracy, how can we ensure that this democracy is as much as a democracy, not only in people being represented, but also in how their votes are counted?
Yeah, I know. I think that's right.
Is that a part of the
And
equation?
ultimately, it's funny. As I said, I'm not. I'm clearly a Democrat. I'm clearly a progressive Democrat, but I'm not like a resistance person. Like I don't go out to the
Mhm.
streets. And I have to
Yeah.
tell you, if if this had been another election where Biden wins by 8 million or however many he won by, and President Trump won because of the Electoral College, I would have gone to the streets. Like I was like,
I mean,
this is not,
that's an issue.
yeah, it's not sustainable. Um,
Yeah.
but the question is whether demographics will move fast enough, which I think they will. I think Georgia's a hint for Texas and then Florida, that
Yeah.
you're just going to have a party that can no longer be only white, right? I mean, it is,
Mhm.
so lots of work to do, but definitely on the right trajectory. I mean, I don't pretend like January 20th changed everything. Lots of legacy problems, lots of immediate problems, but
Mhm.
um, just the draw, like it's like I feel like we've been living in an episode of The Real Housewives of the Situation Room, and it's
Yeah.
just like the drama is like you're done, and we like it's like we're back to the Waltons from my growing up. We're going to go from the Real Housewives to the Waltons in a good way, and so thinking about it that way.
Okay. Well, good. I really appreciate your time,
Thank you.
Juliette.
This was
This
great
has
fun.
been so great. Really excited to share this conversation. Everyone, this is Juliette Kayyem. She's a former DHS official, consultant, mom, contributor to The Atlantic, professor at Harvard and their School of Government. Her expertise is security. That's why we spoke about national security today.